Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Roxie Hart from 1942. And this is continuing my series where I review as much William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. This film is about the play Chicago, not the musical that Bob Fosse made. The play was by Maureen Dallas Watkins, who saw a lot of this going on as a journalist in Chicago. It was made into a 1927 silent film, which this film is kind of a remake of. I haven't seen the silent version. I have seen the movie Chicago, the musical, the movie musical. Roxie Hart is, of course, about the character of Roxie Hart, who they believe has killed this man who came into her house drunk. Now, because this is a post-code film, she does not actually kill him. That's very early on. I'm not blowing anything or spoiling anything for you if you haven't seen the film, because it's the post-code, because you can't have a main character who everybody likes be a murderer. Another blog I read who did a review of this, who does a lot of Wellman reviews, called Movie Classics, and this woman, Judy, writes, she said that it makes this film a lot darker because she's willing to admit she killed someone to get her name in the papers and possibly be hanged or swinged, as they call it, at a certain point. But she might be hanged and put to death for something she didn't do just so she could be famous and infamous. Roxie Hart was fame hungry enough that she did do that, and she got to be a very big deal. And this is about the trial and the whole brouhaha of that. And if you've seen the movie Chicago, you can pretty much kind of get a rough semblance of what the plot is. Now, at first I was actually really worried of seeing a lot of post-code Wellman, because my experience with the film I reviewed earlier this week, Lady of Burlesque with Barbara Stanwyck, wasn't really that great, and it felt like Wellman wasn't up to the snuff to where he was in his pre-code era in the 30s and in the later 30s, and I just was like very disappointed in that. And this film actually kind of works within the code. Now, it also helps that they got this story to work within kind of the code's parameters, which was a major problem with Lady of Burlesque. In Roxie Hart, it feels like they really kind of made a way to shape this to make it work within it while still having kind of a dark undercurrent. I mean, in a way it's smarter. She's so fame hungry, she so wants to be like this Broadway talent that she'll do anything for it. And this film is very sweet. The way Ginger Rogers stars in something, she's always very sweet and nice. This is after she was in all the films with Fred Astaire. I mean, there was one after, but 39 was kind of the end of their run when they're doing film after film after film. This was 2 years after she won her Oscar for Kitty Foyle, and she brings a lot of warmth and vivaciousness, I think, to any role she takes on. And even this role, she's sympathetic towards Roxie Hart. She brings such a warmth to it that it kind of is almost masking how she definitely is playing it, that she knows she's like a kind of a terrible woman. She plays it in such a likable way. I mean, Ginger Rogers is very hard to be unlikable. She just has that kind of energy on screen, and it was interesting to see her use that in her performance. It's a lot lighter of a comedy than I think it's really talking about. It feels like both her and the media are duping everybody and keeping and manipulating everyone with this story, but you never really see the people that are being manipulated very much. You always just see the people who are doing the manipulation. This reminds me a lot of Nothing Sacred, whereas in Nothing Sacred you see kind of the dummies that are being hoodwinked, but in this you're just seeing the manipulators, and they're also fun and funny. They even have a dance sequence in jail, and the manipulators seem a lot of fun, and it's very fun and silly, even though what they're doing is morally pretty corrupt. But they keep it very light, and I think Wellman did a really good job of keeping this light. I actually kind of like this. No, you know what? I do like this a lot more than Nothing Sacred, and I was surprised how much I like this kind of light comedy. It had a good energy to it. It flowed very, very well. This is like a pre-code Wellman comedy that Wellman knew how to do in a post-code world. He figured out how to do it, keeping all the smarts but keeping them undercurrent. And it was a smart movie. It's a little too cutesy, I think, for his normal style, but he gets that to work within it. And I'm very surprised how well it worked within it. And especially that it's kind of a dark comedy that's masqueraded as a cutesy, fun comedy that, you know, Ginger Rogers stars in. And it seemed like Ginger was always up for that kind of a thing. Sometimes I feel like she doesn't get enough credit for how great of a movie star and how great of an actress she really was. Apparently, according to IMDb, and I'm very dubious of this, but I've read it a couple places, this, in 1963, Stanley Kubrick said this was one of his favorite films. That seems very suspect to me. But I think the thing about that is that if you watch this, especially in the courtroom scene where every time there's a big revelation and then you have, you know, the cameras come and take her picture and then you hear the radio announcer doing advertising, it does have a flow that's similar to Doctor Strange. Strangelove. And 1963 was when Dr. Strangelove came out. So I'm not saying this is like the big influence on Dr. Strangelove, but there is a certain similarity. So I'm wondering if maybe he was into this at the time he was making Dr. Strangelove, or that was a film he was thinking of, or a film that he really liked around that period. I don't know. I'm just like kind of going with, he said in 1963, that's what came out in 1963. They are both satires on people of authority, people we trust. I think people kind of trust the media. They trusted them a lot more then. And especially Wellman has such a pessimistic attitude. He's the perfect person to kind of direct this because he's smart. I think he's smarter about doing films with kind of a darker attitude about it, because he can always kind of mask it, even in A Star Is Born, where you have this kind of darker view of Hollywood. He keeps enough lighter tones in it that more people think of it as like a romantic tragedy than kind of a send-up of Hollywood. And I think the same thing with Roxie Hart. This is a smart, dark comedy. It's just trying to be a 40s cutesy comedy at the same time. And I kind of like that. And that all the actors seem to be on board with it. Wellman directed them all very well, and they give really smart comedic performances. There's scenes where there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of movement, kind of like a Preston Sturges kind of thing, which none of that looks easy to direct. And it kind of shows this looks to me more like the Wellman we saw in Nothing Sacred. And I really got a sense he had fun directing this film. The dance sequence is interesting since he never really officially did a musical. Sure, it's not the most accurate depiction, and certainly the ending is pretty laughable, but it's fun if you consider it as just one piece and not as much of an adaptation of the story of Roxie Hart in Chicago. I don't really have any problem with it, really. I think it's a really good postcode movie. I really recommend Roxie Hart. I know it's not the version of Chicago you're used to, but as a cutesy, fun Ginger Rogers comedy, I think it's a lot smarter than you give it credit for. I think that's one of the better things comedy can do, is when you can do something very serious and make it very hilarious and very fun. And this is a movie that takes on all that, and particularly I think not just because of the way Wellman shoots it and directs it and everything, but I think particularly the acting in this film is some of the best comedic acting you can see in Hollywood at the time, especially in the 40s, is on display in this film. And without that, this film wouldn't be what it is. It wouldn't have the fun and the flow to it. And because you have people like Ginger Rogers and Adolph Mayhew, I think, and George Montgomery, and Phil Silvers, and Nigel Bruce, and William Fairley, who you'll recognize later as Fred in I Love Lucy. I think this film really comes together because of all that. It's like a fun Ginger Rogers comedy. Now, certainly I like other Ginger Rogers comedies more that aren't Fred and Ginger movies, you know, like Bachelor Mother. This isn't as good as that, but I'd actually rank it kind of high in all of that. And I had a rather good time. It's nice sometimes seeing a nice, sweet 40s Hays Code comedy that actually works pretty well within itself. And I think that says a lot about Wellman as a director and him as a studio assignment picture director, that, you know, he could get that stuff to work in the pre-Code era and then got that to work and make a good picture in the post-Code era. It is a good Ginger Rogers vehicle, and that's something I will always enjoy. So if you've seen Roxie Hart and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. The next film in my William Wellman series will be the Oxbow Incident, and that will be next week, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. That'll be a lot heavier than this film is. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you then.